My name is Mila Hudson. I'm 41 years old. 3 weeks ago, I sold my farm for $10.5 million. Then, on my husband's advice, I called my parents and my sister and told them I had lost everything. Bankrupt, the sale fell through. The bank had the land. I did exactly as he said, word for word. What my family did next did not take days, it took hours. By the next morning, my father was on the phone and he was not calling to ask if I was all right. He was calling about my grandmother's land, 60 acres of it, and what he thought I owed the family now that I had nothing left. My sister said something to me that week I will carry to my grave. And my husband, the quiet man everyone underestimated, just nodded because it proved the one thing he had suspected for 15 years. Before I take you back to the beginning, if a story about family and land and the price of being honest is something you understand in your bones, take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your town and the time it is where you are. I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now let me take you back to a Tuesday in March, the morning I signed the papers that were supposed to be the happiest of my life. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is where ordinary women, pushed too far by the people who were supposed to love them, stop asking for permission and start setting the record straight, quietly, and for good. If you've ever been treated like a wallet instead of a daughter, you belong here. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. That Tuesday in March, the fog sat low over the lavender rose like it was deciding whether to leave. I had been awake since 4. I walked the long way to the gate, past the cutting beds, past the old barn, and I stopped where my grandmother's hand-painted sign hung crooked on its post. Hudson Hollow, it said in her own brush strokes. The green faded soft. I had built the rest of it myself, 19 years. I planted the first row when I was 22 with a shovel and a loan I had no business getting. We's brought me coffee at the gate the way he had every closing week morning. My husband does not talk much. He spent 30 years as an estate and trust accountant, the kind of man who reads the fine print other people skip, and he reads people the same way. He handed me the cup and said, "Only big day." I had a buyer. A land consistory wanted the whole property kept as a working farm forever, and they were paying $10.5 million for the privilege. My family did not know the number. They knew I was selling. They had been very interested in that lately. My grandmother Ruth left me something else years ago, something quieter, and I drove past it every morning without thinking much about it. That part comes later. For now, there was only the fog and the coffee and the papers waiting in town. We's watched me look back at the sign on the post. "After you sign," he said, "I want to try something before you tell your folks." I laughed. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. The closing took 20 minutes. A pen, a notary, a stack of pages thicker than my wrist. When it was done, the conservancy director shook my hand and told me the lavender rose would outlive both of us, and I believed her. I drove home with Wheeze following in his truck. The money was real now. It sat in an account with my name on it, the kind of number I used to dream about when the well pump broke in February and I could not afford the part. That night we sat at the kitchen table and I reached for the phone to call my mother. Wheeze put his hand flat on the table. "Not on me, on the table. Tell them you're broke," he said. "Then we'll know." I set the phone down. "Know what?" He took his time. He always does. 15 years I've watched them. He said they call when they want something. They go quiet when they don't. I've never been able to prove it to you because you keep paying before the bill comes due. I started to argue. He held up one finger gentle. "Tell them the sale collapsed. Tell them the bank took the farm. Tell them you've got nothing." Then we sit back and we watch what they do with a daughter who can't help them anymore. I have known Wheeze for 16 years. He has never asked me for anything sharp. I looked at the dark window over the sink at the shape of the gate post out there in the night. Then I picked the phone back up. "If you're wrong," I said, "I'm going to feel awful." He nodded. "If I'm wrong, you'll owe them an apology and a good dinner." He paused. "I won't be wrong. Here is the family so you can see them the way I did before that week." My father Dale, 66, ran a feed and seed for 30 years and lost most of what he made co-signing other people's dreams. My mother, Carol, 63, kept the books and kept the peace in that order. My sister Paige is 4 years younger than me and she married Curtis Renner, who has a firm handshake and a softer spine. 2 years ago, Paige and Curtis opened a wedding venue in a converted dairy barn across the county. It is beautiful in photographs. It is also losing money in a way that beautiful things often do. And to buy the equipment, the tent rigging, the commercial kitchen, the generators, they took a loan. My father co-signed it. I knew that the way you know a draft under a door. Then there is the hollow 60 acres. My grandmother Ruth refused to sell to developers. Her whole life, the creek and the oak stand and the old hay barn. When she died, she did not leave it to us as a pile to be split. She put it into a trust, an irrevocable one with a single line that mattered more than all the rest. The land was to be kept, not sold. She named me the trustee. Paige and I are both beneficiaries, but the deciding was mine, because Ruth said I was the only one who would still be standing when the offers came. I had paid the property taxes on it for 9 years without telling anyone. The way I paid for a lot of things. Ruth used to stand at that gate with her coffee and say, "People who only come around when they need the land, child, are not coming around for you." I called my mother first. I told her the sale had fallen through at the last minute, that the conservies' funding collapsed, that the bank was calling the note and I was going to lose the farm. I said it plainly. I did not cry because I was not sad and because I have never been good at performing things I do not feel. There was a silence on the line that lasted a beat too long. Oh, my mother said. Oh, Mila, then have you told your father? I said, not yet. She said she would tell him in a voice that had already moved on to logistics. I called Paige next. She picked up on the second ring, which she never does. I gave her the same story. The pause on her end was shorter and busier like a person doing math. So it's gone, she said all of it. I said it looked that way. And the hollow, she said, what happens to the hollow now? I had not mentioned the hollow. I sat very still in my own kitchen and watched Wheeze across the table who had not moved at all. Nothing happens to the hollow, I said. Why would anything happen to the hollow? Paige made a small sound, the kind you make when you catch yourself. No reason, she said. I'm just worried about you. We hung up. The kitchen was quiet. Out the window the gate post stood black against a grayer black. Wheeze finally spoke. How long, he said, do you think before your father calls about the land? I did not answer. I did not have to. My father called at 7 the next morning, not to ask where I would sleep, not to ask if Wheeze and I were all right. He cleared his throat the way he does before a sale and he said, your mother told me hell of a thing. Then, almost in the same breath, listen, given your situation, the family's been talking. We think the smart move is for you to step down as trustee. Let us sell the hollow. Get ahead of your creditors before they come sniffing around family property. I let the words land in the room. Step down, let us sell, creditors. He had clearly rehearsed it, or someone had rehearsed it for him. I heard a second voice in the background. Sharp. And then Paige took the phone. My sister did not soften anything. Be honest with yourself, Mila, she said. You lost your own land. You don't get to keep ours. I held the phone away from my ear for a second and looked at it. This small object carrying my sister's voice, then I brought it back. Grandma's land isn't ours, Paige, I said. It's hers. It still is. There was scrambling on the other end, my mother's voice now, my father's. All three of them in one room I was not in, deciding the shape of my life before breakfast. The phone in my house lit up twice more before I set it face down on the table. 3 weeks ago, these were people who would have driven across the county to help me carry boxes. I looked at Wheeze. He had been right. And being right had not made him happy. There it is, he said quietly. Now we know who they are. I drove into town that same morning to see Glenn Marsh. Glenn drew up my grandmother's trust the year I turned 30, and he has the kind of office that still smells like paper and cold coffee. He is 70 now and he listens with his whole face. I told him everything, the real sale, the lie I had told, the call that came back inside of 12 hours. He did not look surprised. He looked tired in the way honest lawyers look when they have seen a thing too many times. Let me say this slowly, Glenn said, because people get it wrong and it costs them. He laid his hands flat. The hollow is not yours. It is not Paige's. It belongs to the trust. The two of you hold a beneficial interest, not a deed. That means neither of you can walk into a courthouse and force a sale. There is nothing to partition. The land answers to the trust and the trust answers to me reading it and to you administering it. I asked the question I had to ask. What if they say I'm bankrupt, that I'm unfit? Glenn almost smiled. Being broke is not a crime and it is not a breach. To remove a trustee, they would have to file in court and prove you violated your duty. Mismanagement, self-deing, they have none of that because you have done none of that. He leaned back. Your personal creditors, real or imagined, cannot touch trust land. That is the whole point of the kind of trust your grandmother built. I sat with it. The relief was not warm. It was cold and clear like creek water. Then let them come, I said. Let them show me the whole hand before I show them mine. My mother called that afternoon and her voice had changed costumes. The logistics were gone. Now there was honey in it. Honey, we're only trying to protect the family, she said. You don't want creditors dragging Grandma's name through the mud. You'd never forgive yourself. I asked her what creditors she imagined coming for 60 acres of hay and oak trees. She did not have an answer, so she moved sideways the way she always has. Your father isn't sleeping, she said. And there, for the first time, I heard something true under the performance. He co-signed that loan for Paige's place. If the venue goes under, the bank comes for him, for us, for the house. So there it was, not stated, but standing in the room with us. I felt the old pull, the one that has run my whole life, the urge to fix it, to write the check, to make the fear go away so everyone could breathe. I have spent 41 years being the one who breathes last. Mom, I said as gently as I could, I hear that you're scared. She started to cry and some of it was real, and that is the part that is hard to tell anyone. My mother is not a monster. My mother is a frightened woman who learned a long time ago that I would absorb whatever she handed me. Then help us, she said. You always help us. I closed my eyes. The lavender smell came in off my hands where it lives this time of year, no matter how I scrub. Just think about your father, she said, and hung up before I could answer. The way you leave a door open on purpose. They called a family meeting for Thursday at my parents' homestead 3 miles up the road from the farm. I went because you learn more in a room than over a phone. The old house smelled like my whole childhood, wood smoke and percolated coffee, and for a second I almost forgot why I was there. Then Curtis Renner set a manila folder on the kitchen table and slid it toward me with 2 fingers like it might bite him. "We had this drawn up to make things easy," he said. Inside was a packet, a consent to resignation of trustee, my name typed where my signature should go. Under it, a quitclaim deed for the hollow and a document authorizing the sale of trust property. Curtis is not a lawyer. Somebody had walked him through it, or he had bought it off a website, and either way it had the smell of a thing done in a hurry. My father would not meet my eyes. Paige stood with her arms crossed by the stove. My mother kept refilling cups that were already full. "It just makes sense," Curtis said. "You step aside, the land sells, your dad's loan gets cleared, everybody's whole again. We're trying to save you from yourself here, Mila." I picked up the folder. I did not open my mouth to argue because arguing tells people where your fences are. "I'll look it over," I said. Curtis exhaled like he had been holding it. "Sooner is better," he said, "for everyone." I tucked the folder under my arm and looked once around that kitchen at the 4 faces deciding my grandmother's land between sips of coffee. "Sooner for who?" I said, and let myself out before anyone could answer. A small county has no secrets, only delays. By Friday, I knew more than they wanted me to. A woman I went to high school with works the desk at the bank that holds Curtis's equipment loan. And she did not tell me anything she shouldn't have. She only said when I asked how Paige's venue was doing that I should talk to my sister soon, and she said it with her eyes down. So I made some calls that were mine to make. The loan was in default, 2 missed payments, then a third. The venue's fall bookings had collapsed after a bad season, and the bank had sent the kind of letter that uses the word acceleration. My father's name was on that loan under Curtis's, which meant when the venue went down, it would reach across the county and take the homestead with it. That was the fear in my mother's voice. That was the rehearsed speech on the phone. The hollow was never about my grandmother. It was the only asset within reach that was paid off and worth real money, and they needed it converted to cash before the bank moved. I sat in my truck outside the feed store and let it settle. There is a particular grief in confirming the thing you hoped you were wrong about. I called Wheeze. "It's the loan," I said. "Curtis's loan, Dad's on it. They're not trying to save me, they're trying to save themselves. And they picked the one thing of Grandma's that's worth enough to do it." Wheeze was quiet for a moment. "Then they've told you exactly who comes first," he said. "Now you get to decide if you're still on the list." Paige got ahead of me with the neighbors, which is a thing she has always been good at. By the weekend, the story had grown legs and walked the whole valley. Mila overextended on the farm and lost it. Mila's drowning in debt. Mila's clinging to Grandma's land out of spite while her own father's about to lose his house. I heard it come back to me in pieces, the way these things do. At the gas station, a woman I have known since church youth group put her hand on my arm and said she was praying for me and my family in this hard time, and the way she said family did not include me. At the co-op, 2 men I have sold lavender to for a decade got quiet when I walked in. Paige had cast me before I had said a word in my own defense, and that is the cruelty of being the one who stays calm. People mistake your silence for guilt. I understood the play. If the valley believed I was a sinking woman holding the family hostage, then when I finally refused to sign, I would look like the villain and they would look like a family doing the hard loving thing. It was good strategy. I almost admired it. I drove past the venue on my way home, the converted dairy barn with the string lights and the empty parking lot, and I saw Paige's car there alone. And for 1 second I felt the old reflex to pull in and ask if she was okay. Then I remembered a sentence. "You lost your own land, you don't get to keep ours." I kept driving. The lavender smell came up off my hands at the wheel, steady as ever, the only thing in the county still loyal to me. That evening I went out to the hollow alone. The leaseback gave me 60 more days on my own farm. But the hollow had always been the place I went to think since I was a girl. My grandmother's sign hung on the gate post, Hudson Hollow in her faded green hand, and I stood there the way she used to with a thermos instead of a mug, and I let myself remember her. Ruth raised 3 kids on that land and buried a husband on it. She turned down a developer who offered her a number that would have changed everything. And when I asked her why, she said, "Land remembers who walked it, and she did not intend to be forgotten by a parking lot." She taught me to cut lavender at the right angle. She taught me to read a man by what he does when he thinks no one needs him. She is the reason I built a farm instead of leaving this valley. And she is the reason that standing at her gate in the dark, I finally understood that I was not fighting for 60 acres. I was fighting for the right to be the kind of woman she trusted me to be. If you've ever stood at a fence line that someone you loved built with their hands and felt them ask you quietly not to let it go, then you already know why I did not pick up that pen. Do me a favor before we go on. Pull the deed to whatever matters most to you, your home, your land, your family's place, and read who is actually on it. And what happens if you cannot speak for yourself someday? Then come back and stay with me. Because the part where they tried to do it in front of the whole valley is next. They tried again on Sunday. Over dinner, my mother cooked the way she cooks when she wants something. Pot roast and the good rolls. Halfway through, Curtis brought the folder back out and set it by my plate with a pen on top like a dessert. "We've got a buyer interested already," he said. "A developer out of the city, but these things move fast." So he tapped the pen. I wiped my hands on the napkin and opened the packet properly this time, slowly in front of all of them, and I read it the way Glenn taught me to read everything. That was when I saw it. The quitclaim deed already had a date typed in 2 days out. There was a notary line filled in with a name I recognized, a woman who works at Curtis's bank. They had not brought me a proposal. They had brought me a closing. The whole thing was built to be signed tonight and recorded Tuesday. Before I could think, before I could ask anyone, while I was supposedly too broke and too rattled to read the fine print, my father watched me find the date. He had the decency to look away. I set the pen down on the table. "Not hard, just down. I don't sign what I haven't read twice," I said, "and I've now read this twice." Paige's jaw tightened. "Mila." I stood and gathered the folder under my arm again. "Thank you for dinner, Mom," I said. The rolls were perfect. I drove home 3 miles in the dark with the folder on the passenger seat like a sleeping animal, and I thought, not yet. Not here. When I take this apart, it will be somewhere they cannot pretend it didn't happen. The Valley has a thing every fall called the Harvest Blessing, a potluck at the Grange Hall the Saturday before the first frost. Everyone comes. The church ladies bring the casseroles, the 4-H kids bring the pies, and somebody always says a few words about the season and the land. It is the most public room my world has. So of course that is where Paige decided to plant her flag. My mother let it slip on the phone trying to sound casual. "Paige is going to say a little something about the family's plans for the hollow." She said, "A preservation idea." People are excited. I asked, "What preservation idea?" "Oh, you know," my mother said, "keeping it in the family, doing right by Grandma." I knew exactly what it was. They were going to stand up in front of the whole valley and announce a plan to sell my grandmother's land, dressed up as honoring her, with me cast as the bankrupt holdout who would not get out of the way. If they could get the room nodding along, the pressure on me would not be a phone call anymore. It would be a community. We's found me at the kitchen table that night with the folder open and Glenn's notes beside it. "You're going," he said. It was not a question. "I'm going," I said, "and I'm bringing the trust." He looked at me for a long moment. "Are you going to read it out there?" I shut the folder. "No," I said, "not yet. I want them to say every word of it in front of God and the casseroles first. Let them put their names on it. Then I take it apart where it counts." The Grange Hall smelled like coffee urns and floor wax and 40 years of the same green bean dishes. I came in alone and sat near the back in a folding chair, and I felt the room shift its weight away from me, the small, dishonest way a crowd does when it has already chosen a story. After the blessing and the pies, my father stood up, then thought better of it and sat. And Paige took the floor instead, because Paige has always been the one who can stand in front of people. She had a stack of printed sheets. She talked about Grandma Ruth, about legacy, about how hard it is to hold land together when, and here she let her eyes drift to the back of the room, when circumstances change for some members of a family. Curtis moved down the rows, handing out the sheets. I took one. It was a glossy thing, a Hudson land legacy plan with a soft photo of the oak stand and a paragraph about responsible stewardship and a future. And nowhere on it, anywhere, was the word trustee or my name. They had erased me from my own grandmother's land on a color printout. The room made the warm, approving sound rooms make. A woman patted Paige's shoulder as she sat. My father finally looked at me across all those folding chairs, and his face was not cruel. It was relieved. He thought it was working. I held the glossy sheet in my lap and did not crumple it, though my hand wanted to. I had come for exactly this. I needed them to say it out loud in public with witnesses before I ever opened my mouth. They had just done it. The whole valley had watched them do it. I could have stood up right then. Part of me wanted to, the part that had been called a sinking woman at the gas station and prayed over like a widow. I could have walked to the front and held up my closing statement and my grandmother's trust and ended it in 1 minute in front of everyone and let them all watch my family's faces fall. I have thought about that choice many times since. I did not do it. I learned something from my grandmother about timing and about the difference between being right and winning. A reveal in a Grange Hall is a story people tell for a week. A ruling in a courtroom is a record that never goes away. So I stayed in my folding chair, and when Paige passed near me afterward with her stack of glossy sheets, she leaned down just for me and said it again, softer this time, almost kind. "You lost your own land, Mila. Let us have this one." I looked up at my sister. "Okay," I said just that. Her face did something complicated. Suspicion and relief fighting over the same square inch. I let her have the suspicion. I gathered my coat and walked out into the cold, and Wheeze was waiting by the truck with the engine running and the heater on. I got in and shut the door and breathed. "Well," he said, "how bad?" I almost laughed. "They handed out a printout," I said, "with my name taken off Grandma's land to the whole valley." Wheeze pulled onto the dark road. "Then they just signed their names to it," he said, "in front of everyone you'll ever need as a witness." I watched the Grange Hall lights shrink in the mirror. "Yes," I said, "they did." The week after the Grange Hall, my family moved the way a flock moves when it thinks the field is theirs. I know the timeline because Glenn keeps records and because in a small county the courthouse clerk goes to my church. On Monday morning, Curtis met with a paralegal in town. By Monday afternoon, Paige had called my mother 4 times. That evening, my mother called me once and hung up before I answered. On Tuesday, a process server I have known since Little League stood on my porch looking like he wanted to be anywhere else and handed me an envelope. Inside was a petition. My sister and my father as beneficiaries were asking the court to remove me as trustee of the Ruth Hudson Trust on the grounds that my insolvency made me unfit to manage family assets and expose the trust to my creditors. There was a hearing date 3 weeks out. They had put it in writing. They had filed it with the county where anyone could read it, where it would sit in the record with my name and the word unfit. I stood on my own porch and read it twice because that is how I read things now. The server shifted his weight. "I'm real sorry, Mila," he said. "I didn't want this one." I told him it wasn't his fault because it wasn't. I went inside and laid the petition on the kitchen table next to the folder and the trust, and the 3 of them sat there like a hand of cards. Then I called Glenn, and I read it to him over the phone slowly all the way through. When I finished, there was a silence, and then Glenn said something I had never heard him say in 12 years. "Oh," he said, "oh, they really shouldn't have done that." I drove to Glenn's office the next morning. He had the petition spread out on his desk with a yellow pad covered in his small, careful hand. "Here is where they are," he said. "They have filed a petition with no legs. Insolvency is not a breach of duty. You have not self-dealt. You have not mismanaged. You have paid the taxes out of your own pocket for years, which a court will notice. There is no creditor because there is no bankruptcy. The land is in an irrevocable trust with a preservation clause, which means even if every beneficiary on earth wanted it sold, I would stand up and read the clause and the judge would tell them no." He took off his glasses. "On the law, this is over before it starts." I waited because Glenn always has a second half, but he said it is filed, it is public. Right now today, this valley believes you are a desperate woman and that petition sits in the record agreeing with them. You can make it quietly disappear. I can call their paralegals, scare him, and they will withdraw it by Friday and nobody will ever know the truth. He looked at me. Or I said, or you let it go to the hearing. You let them stand up in open court and say every word out loud. And then you put the real closing statement and this trust on the table, and you let the record show permanently exactly who tried to take your grandmother's land and why. I thought about the gas station, the prayer that did not include me, the glossy printout with my name erased when I said, "Does it cost them the most to be wrong?" Glenn almost smiled in a courtroom. He said, "With witnesses on the record." I picked up my coat. "Then we wait for the hearing." Not everyone in the valley took the easy story. Hazel Pewitt lives on the road between the homestead and the hollow, and she looked after my grandmother in the last 2 years, drove her to appointments, sat with her at the end. Hazel is 81 and afraid of nothing. She drove her old wagon up my lane on Thursday and let herself in without knocking the way the old ones do and set a foil-covered plate on my counter. "I don't believe a word of it," she said before I could even offer coffee. I asked which word. "Any of it," she said. "I knew your grandmother better than her own children did. Ruth put that land in your hands for a reason, and the reason is sitting in my kitchen looking like she hasn't slept." She pointed a crooked finger at me. "You are not broke. I don't know what you're up to, Mila Hudson, but you've got Ruth's face on right now. The one she wore when she was about to let a man finish digging his own hole." I started to laugh and found it came out closer to crying. Hazel waved it off. "Don't," she said. "Save it. You'll want it later." She told me a story then about Ruth and the developer, about how my grandmother let the man think he had one for a full month before she said no in front of the whole zoning board with the man's own letter in her hand. She said the trick, Hazel told me, is to let them spend all their breath first. Then she patted my cheek with a hand like a dry leaf and let herself back out. And I stood in my kitchen holding a plate of somebody's love and felt for the first time that week that I was not alone in this. My mother came to me alone, which she almost never does. She drove up 2 days before the hearing and sat at my kitchen table with her coat still on and her hands shook around the cup. She did not bring honey this time. She brought the truth, or as close as she gets to it. "Your father is going to lose the house," she said. "If that venue goes under and the bank comes, we lose everything, Mila. 50 years, the garden, the porch, the room you grew up in." Her voice cracked and did not perform the cracking. I lie awake doing the math. There is no math. The only thing that's paid off, the only thing worth enough is the hollow. She looked at me, and for a moment she was not the woman who left doors open on purpose. She was just scared. "Please," she said, "just sign it. I am begging my own daughter. Let us sell Grandma's land so we can keep ours." I reached across the table and held her shaking hands in mine, and I meant it. All of it. "Mom," I said, "I love you. I'm not signing." She pulled her hands back like I had burned her. "You'd let us drown," she said, "over dirt." "It's not dirt to me," I said. "And there's another way out of this that nobody's looked at because you've all been so busy looking at the one thing that isn't yours." She did not hear that part. People who are drowning never hear the part about the rope. She stood and buttoned her coat she had never unbuttoned, and at the door she said, "I hope it's worth it," and left. It was the closest thing to a goodbye I would get from her for a long time. They got impatient. The hearing was 4 days out, but a confident person does not wait, and my family had convinced themselves they had already won. On Wednesday, I drove to the hollow and found Curtis's truck backed up to the old hay barn and the doors flung open. They were clearing it out. My grandmother's things, the ones I had left in there because the barn was hers and felt like the right place for them, were stacked in the truck bed under a tarp. The cedar chest, the hand tools with her initials burned into the handles, and when I looked up at the gate, the post was bare. Someone had pried my grandmother's sign off its bracket and tossed it somewhere because a sign that says, "Hudson Hollow does not help you sell a parcel to a developer out of the city." I stood in the empty doorway of my grandmother's barn and felt something I had been holding off all week finally arrive. Not anger, something older and quieter and worse. They were not just trying to sell the land. They were erasing the woman the way they had erased my name from the printout, scrubbing her off the gate so the place would be easier to hand to a stranger. If you have ever watched someone treat what your family built as nothing more than square footage and equity, then you know the particular cold that came over me in that doorway. And if you are watching this and there is a place that holds your people, do not assume it will protect itself. Put it in writing. Lock the door that matters before someone you love decides it is just an asset. I will tell you how I locked mine, but first I had to find my grandmother's sign and I could not find it anywhere. And that was the night I came the closest to breaking. I want to be honest with you because I have been honest with you this whole time. That night I sat down on the dirt floor of my grandmother's emptied barn and I did not get up for a long while. The hearing was 4 days away. The petition was in the record. The valley believed I was a bitter woman holding a grieving family hostage. My mother had told me I would let them drown over dirt. My sister had said the words I will hear in my sleep until I die. And my grandmother's sign, the green letters she painted with her own hand at a kitchen table I can still see, was gone, thrown into a ditch or a dumpster by people who shared her blood. I had played it carefully. I had let them spend their breath the way Ruth taught Hazel taught me, but sitting on that cold floor, careful did not feel like strength. It felt like I had let them go too far to test a theory I already knew the answer to. I had let my mother beg. I had let my grandmother's barn be emptied. For what? For a clean record, for a better story in a courtroom. I put my head down on my knees in the dark and I let myself for about 10 minutes be a person who had lost something instead of a person with a plan. The lavender smell was still on my hands. It is always on my hands. I do not know how long I would have sat there. I only know that I heard a truck on the gravel and headlights swung across the open barn doors and I lifted my head and it was Wheeze. Wheeze did not tell me to get up. He did not tell me it would be all right, which is one of the reasons I married him. He crossed the barn and sat down next to me on the cold floor in his good coat and put his arm around me and we sat there together in the dark and the dust. After a while he said, "I drove past earlier, saw the truck." He paused. I went through the ditch on the county road. Then he reached behind him into the dark and he set something down on the floor between us. It was the sign Hudson Hollow in my grandmother's faded green hand. One corner cracked where the crowbar had caught it, but whole. He had found it where they had thrown it, and he had carried it here, and he had not said a word about it until I was ready to see it. I put my hand flat on the painted wood the way Glenn puts his hands flat when he tells the truth. "They threw her in a ditch," I said. "They did," we said. "And you got her out," we sat with that. Out past the doors, the oaks were black against a sky going to stars. "I let it go too far," I said. "Maybe," we said. "Or maybe you needed to see all the way to the bottom of them so you'd never wonder again." He squeezed my shoulder. "You're not wondering anymore, are you?" I looked at the cracked green letters. "No," I said, "I'm not." And something in me, which had been sitting on a cold floor, stood back up. We loaded my grandmother's things back out of nowhere we could reach. But we took the sign home that night and set it on the kitchen table under the good light. And I sat across from it with the trust and the petition and the closing statement laid out in a row. We made coffee at midnight, which we never do. He set my cup down and looked at the 4 things on the table, the sign and the 3 documents, and he said the thing he had said 3 weeks before turned around now. "Tell them you're broke," he said quietly. "Then well, no," he sat. "Well, now we know." I wrapped both hands around the hot cup. "Now we know," I said. "So now you decide," we said, "not what's true. You've known what's true since the first phone call. You decide who you protect because you cannot protect the land and the family both. They made you choose and they did it on purpose and you do not owe them the comfort of pretending otherwise." I looked at my grandmother's green letters cracked at the corner, rescued from a ditch by the quietest man I know. I thought about Ruth at the zoning board with the developer's own letter in her hand, letting him spend all his breath. "Tomorrow I call Glenn." I said, "We let the hearing happen." I read the trust out loud and I put $10.5 million on the table in front of a judge and let them understand exactly what they did. Wheeze lifted his coffee like a toast. "There she is," he said. Outside the gate post stood empty in the dark, waiting for its sign to come home. The hearing was on a Tuesday, 3 weeks to the day from the morning I signed away my farm. The county courthouse is a square brick building with a clock that has been 11 minutes slow my whole life. I wore the gray dress I wear to funerals. Glenn met me on the steps with a soft leather folder under his arm and a calm I have only ever seen in men who have read the whole book before the test. Whatever they say in there, he told me, you stay in your chair, you keep your voice low, and you let me hand you each thing in its order. We are not going to shout. We are going to be correct inside. My family was already seated on the right, dressed like the wronged. My father in his one good jacket, my mother beside him looking at her hands. Paige in front, chin up, a woman who had come to collect. Curtis beside their lawyer, a young man from the city who kept checking his phone. And in the back row where she always sits, Hazel Pewitt in her church coat with her arms folded, watching my family the way you watch a pot that is about to boil over. I sat down next to Glenn and set my own folder square in front of me. Inside it were three things. My grandmother's trust, the recorded deed to the hollow, and the closing statement for a farm that had sold for $10.5 million to a conservancy that intended to keep it growing lavender long after all of us were gone. The judge came in, we rose. The clerk read the matter of the removal of the trustee of the Ruth Hudson Trust, and I felt the room lean toward my family the way the Grange Hall had. Not for long, I thought, not this time. Their lawyer went first because they had filed, and he stood and made the case they had paid him to make. He said the trustee, meaning me, had suffered a complete financial collapse. He said my bankruptcy created an unacceptable risk that my personal creditors would reach trust property and that the family's heritage could be lost to satisfy my debts. He said removal was necessary to protect the beneficiaries and the land. He said it well enough. He used the word unfit twice. My father nodded along. Paige watched me the whole time, waiting for me to flinch, and I did not give her one. When he sat down, Glenn rose, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not hurry. Your Honor, he said, my client is the trustee, and we are not going to argue about her feelings this morning. We are going to read 3 documents, and then I believe this petition resolves itself. He slid the first one to the clerk. This is the Ruth Hudson Trust, executed and notarized 11 years ago. It is irrevocable. I direct the court to the 4th article, which I will read in full. And he read it. My grandmother's instruction in a lawyer's flat voice that the 60 acres known as Hudson Hollow were to be held in trust and preserved, not sold, not partitioned, not encumbered, and that the trustee was charged with keeping the land intact for as long as the law allowed. The petitioners, Glenn said, ask this court to authorize a sale. The trust forbids a sale. There is nothing further to authorize. He slid the second document across. This is the recorded deed. Title to the hollow is held by the trust. Not by my client personally, not by the petitioners. The beneficiaries hold a beneficial interest, which is a right to the trust's proper administration. It is not a deed. You cannot partition it. You cannot reach it. And a trust's personal finances, whatever they may be, do not travel into trust property. Because an irrevocable trust exists precisely to keep one person's troubles from swallowing what was meant for everyone. He let that sit. The city lawyer was no longer checking his phone. As for removal, Glenn went on, the standard is breach of fiduciary duty, mismanagement, self-dealing, waste. The petition alleges none of these. It alleges that my client is poor. Your Honor, poverty is not a breach. If it were, half this county would be unfit to hold a mailbox key. A sound went through the room, almost a laugh, quickly swallowed. My father had stopped nodding. Paige's chin had come down by a degree, and Glenn turned and looked at me and gave the smallest nod, which meant the next part was mine. The judge asked if the trustee wished to be heard. I said, yes, Your Honor. And I stood and I kept my voice exactly where Glenn told me to keep it, low and level, because I had learned that the calmest voice in a loud room is the one everyone leans in to hear. There is one more document, I said. I slid it across to the clerk myself. This is the closing statement for the sale of my farm. It was finalized 3 weeks ago. My farm did not fall into bankruptcy. The bank did not take it. I sold it intact to a land conservancy for $10.5 million. I let the number sit in that wooden room. I am not broke, I said. I have never been broke. I told my family that I had lost everything because my husband asked me to as a way of finding out something he had suspected for 15 years and that I had refused to believe. I did not look at Weeze, but I felt him in the room. And what we found out is in the petition that is sitting in your record. Within 12 hours of believing I had nothing left to give them, my father and my sister moved to take the one thing my grandmother trusted me to protect, not to grieve with me, to process me out of the way. My father made a sound. Paige came up out of her chair. That is not Your Honor. She lied to us. She humiliated the judge, said her name once quietly, and she kept going, her voice climbing the way mine stayed down. You lost your own land, she said to me across the courtroom, the word she had said 3 times now. You don't get to. I didn't go broke, Paige, I said, and I did not raise my voice to do it. I just stopped paying your bills. The room went very still. My sister stood there with the rest of her sentence dying in her mouth. I turned back to the judge. I have paid the taxes on the hollow for 9 years out of my own pocket. I have never taken a dollar out of that trust. The only person in this room who has tried to convert my grandmother's land into cash is sitting at that table because his son-in-law's loan is in default and my father co-signed it. The city lawyer put a hand on Curtis's arm. Too late. I am not unfit, I said. I am exactly what my grandmother appointed me to be. The person still standing when the offers came. I sat down. Glenn folded his hands and the judge looked at the petition in front of him for a long, long moment. The way you look at something you already know how to rule on. The judge asked the petitioner's lawyer a single question. Counsel, he said, is there any allegation in this petition that the trustee mismanaged the trust, self-dealt, or wasted its assets? The young man stood and buttoned his jacket and unbuttoned it again. Your Honor, the petition is grounded in the trust's financial condition, which the judge said she has shown to be the opposite of what you alleged. I'll ask once more. Any allegation of breach, anything beyond her finances? The lawyer looked down at his table, at Curtis, at my father, at the petition that had nothing else in it because there was nothing else to put. No, Your Honor, he said, not at this time. I watched it travel across my family's faces, the understanding arriving at different speeds. It got it first and went gray because Curtis had always known what this was really about. My father got it next and put his hand over his mouth. An old man doing math he could no longer pretend wasn't his. The venue, the loan, the acceleration letter. All of it still coming now without the one asset they had counted on to outrun it. And my mother. My mother looked at me across that courtroom and for one unguarded second her face was not angry and not scared. It was ashamed. She had begged me to sell my grandmother's land to save her house, and she had just heard in a judge's plain question what that had made of her. She held my eyes for that 1 second and I saw her understand it. And then she looked away and the second was over and she did not get to keep it. I will not tell you she changed. She did not. But for that one breath my mother knew exactly what she had done. And that is the closest thing to justice some families ever get. The judge sat down the petition. I think he said we're done here. The judge dismissed the petition from the bench. He used careful language the way judges do, but the meaning was plain enough for the whole room. The trust was valid. The land could not be sold. The trustee had not breached any duty and would not be removed. Then he added something I had not asked for and did not expect, looking over his glasses at the petitioner's table. He said that a petition this thin, filed against a fiduciary on grounds that turned out to be false, came close to the kind of filing a court could shift costs for, and that he would entertain a motion from my counsel on the question of fees. Glenn did not file one. He told me afterward that the threat was worth more than the money, and he was right, the way he is usually right. But the part that mattered most happened the following week, and it happened because of a thing Glenn and I had been quietly building since the day the petition arrived. As trustee, with the authority the trust gave me and a court order confirming it, I placed a permanent conservation easement on the hollow. It is recorded now at the same county courthouse in the same book that holds the dismissed petition. It means the 60 acres can never be sold, never be developed, never be partitioned by me, by Paige, by my children or hers, by anyone, for as long as there is a county to record it. The thing my family tried to take in a hurry, I locked away forever, slowly on purpose, in writing. My grandmother turned down a developer with a letter in her hand. I turned down my whole family with a clause in a deed. She would have liked that. She always said the trick was to let them spend all their breath first. They caught me in the hallway after the way families do when the official part is over and the personal part wants its turn. Paige came at me first, her voice low and furious. You made us look like criminals, she said in front of everyone. I looked at my sister for a long moment. No, I said, I let you look like exactly what you decided to be. There's a difference and someday you'll understand it. My father would not look at me at all. He stood by the water fountain with his hands in his pockets, a man who co-signed one dream too many and had finally run out of people to hand the bill to. My mother stood between them and she opened her mouth and I held up my hand gently the way Weez had held up one finger in my kitchen a month before. I'm not going to yell, I said. I'm too tired to yell and you're not worth the voice. So here's where the fence goes. The hollow is protected forever, and that's the end of that conversation. Dad's loan is Dad's loan. I didn't make it and I'm not paying it. And the next time any of you call me, it had better not be about money because I won't pick up. Paige started to say something. You can be angry, I told her. You've earned that, I suppose, but you don't get to be confused. You knew exactly who I was. You just thought I'd stopped being her. I picked up my folder. Hazel was waiting for me at the end of the hall with her church coat and her terrible, wonderful smile. I walked toward her and I did not look back. And that was the first time in my whole life I left a room first. Here is how it settled. In case you are the kind of person who needs to know the after the way I always do. The venue went under that winter the way beautiful things that lose money do. The bank came for what it was owed. My parents did not lose the homestead in the end because my father sold off the last of his equipment, and Paige and Curtis sold the dairy barn for a fraction of the dream. And between them they covered enough to keep the bank away from the porch I grew up on. They did it without me. It turns out they could. When the easy door was finally locked, I did not gloat about that. I want you to know that there was a version of me, a younger one who would have ought to step in at the last minute and be the hero and would have called it love. I let her stay, sat down. Wheeze and I bought a small place at the edge of the valley, a farmhouse and 11 acres, nothing like what I sold, everything I wanted. I put in lavender that first spring, 2 long rows, and the smell came back to my hands like it had never left. My family and I do not talk much now. My mother sends a card at Christmas, I send one back. We have built out of the wreck a quiet and honest distance, which is more than we had when we were pretending. I did not go broke. I just stopped paying everyone's bills but my own. And it turned out I could afford a whole life with what was left. There was one more thing I had to do, and I did it on a clear morning in May. I drove out to the hollow, which is mine to look after and no one's to sell, and I brought my grandmother's sign. Wheeze had fixed the cracked corner over the winter, sanded it smooth, and a man at the hardware store had matched the green so close you would have to know where the crack was to find it. I climbed the little ladder, and I hung Hudson Hollow back on its post, where it has hung longer than I have been alive. And I stepped back and I looked at it swing a little in the breeze off the creek. My grandmother used to stand right here with her coffee and tell me that land remembers who walked it. I think people are the same. I think the hollow remembers Ruth and remembers me paying the taxes nobody knew about, and remembers the morning my husband told me to tell a lie so we could finally see the truth. Tell them you're broke, he said, then we'll know we know now. And the strange thing, the thing I did not expect, is that knowing did not make me bitter. It made me light. I am not waiting anymore for my family to become the people I wanted them to be. I am just standing at my grandmother's gate in the lavender wind, exactly where she trusted me to stand. Wheeze came up the lane while I was still standing there, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, the way he has done on every important morning of my life. He handed me one and looked up at the sign. Crooked, he said. She'd have liked it crooked, I said. We stood at the gate together and drank our coffee and did not say much because the quiet man and the woman who finally stopped paying for everyone had said all the important things already. The lavender rose ran down toward the creek, green going to gray purple, and somewhere a long way off, a tractor was working a field and the whole valley smelled like spring and second chances. I thought about the daughter I used to be, the one who picked up every phone call, who wrote every check, who believed that if she just carried enough, her family would love her the way she loved them. I do not miss her. I am proud of her. And I do not miss her, that's my story. A farm sold for more than I ever dreamed. A lie my husband asked me to tell, and a grandmother's 60 acres locked away from the people who tried to take them forever. If this story made you think about a place or a person or a name on a deed that you have been meaning to protect, do not wait. Read the fine print. Lock the door that matters. And if it reminded you that walking away can be the strongest thing a woman ever does, then share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you at the next gate.